Welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up Blender to make the most use of its functions. Okay, so now that Blender's installed, we are met with this quick setup screen. So the first time you open up Blender, this is what's going to show up. You can choose your language. You can choose whether you want to use shortcuts. I'm going to stick with Blender's default shortcuts. We're also going to stick with select with left. Now, just as a personal preference, I like to change spacebar from play to search, and that just allows me to very quickly search for any tools or options that I want to use. I'm also going to stick with the Blender Dark theme. There are a few different options in here that you might prefer, and it's also very good if, for example, you're colorblind or if you have any other issues. Some of these other options may suit you better. I am going to, as I said, stick with Blender Dark. Now, if you have previous settings from a previous version of Blender, you can load those settings here and you can save your settings. I'm just going to quickly just click off this screen and show you the default workspace. So Blender's split up into different workspaces. Along the top row here, we have a few different options for those workspaces, and we'll dive into that a little bit later on. But for the moment, what we want to do is we want to just set up a Blender correctly so we can make full use of Blender. So I'm going to go to the Edit menu, scroll down to Preferences, and open this up. Now in here, what I want to do is I'm going to keep the splash screen on. This is a screen that will appear anytime you open up Blender, and it gives you the option to open up new files, open up previous files, recover last section, and see any recent files that you've opened up. Now jumping back to user preferences. There's a few changes I'd like to make in here first of all. Let's go down to input. And just a note on 3-button mouse and the number pad. The number pad on the keyboard is usually on the far right of the keyboard, and it has all your numbers, your enter, your plus, minus, forward slash, etc. If for some reason you're on a laptop or you have a keyboard that doesn't have a number pad, I recommend turning on Emulate Number Pad, just so that you can use the 1 to 0 keys on your keyboard to change views. That's really important. It lets you navigate around your scene a lot better. If you don't have a 3-button mouse, meaning you don't have a scroll wheel between your left and right mouse buttons, again, I recommend emulating 3-button mouse. You would just use Alt and left click to emulate the middle mouse button, and that's really useful for navigating around your scene. Again, these options only useful if you don't have a 3-button mouse or you don't have a number pad. I can keep these off because I have both, and I definitely recommend picking those up. I'm going to go to navigation, and I'm going to turn on orbit around selection, so that anytime we orbit around our scene and we have something selected, we will orbit around that, meaning it will stay in the same position on the screen. I find that option much easier to work with. I'm also going to turn on zoom to mouse position, and that way I can zoom in on wherever my mouse is hovering over in the scene. Again, I find that really useful. The next thing we're going to change is in systems. We're going to make sure we have our render device selected. Now I have an RTX card, so I'll be choosing optics. If you have an Intel card or an older NVIDIA card, you would choose one of these other options. And there's also the new Intel graphics processors that you would find through one of these different settings here. This one for AMD processors, this one for Intel. I'm going to turn my undo steps all the way up to maximum, just so I have many more options for going back if I make a mistake. The next thing is save and load. We want to make sure autosave is turned on. I have this set to 2 minutes. So if you're in a Blender scene which you've already saved, every 2 minutes it will create a backup copy of that scene. And that way the most you can ever lose is 2 minutes of work if you get an unexpected crash. The next thing I'm going to change is in file paths. You have an option here to select a folder for your render output, which we may do a little bit later. We can choose external applications for image editing and animation. And we can also add user library. So at this point, I actually have some files already created for this course, and I can add them into the user library by clicking plus. I'm going to go to the desktop, and I have a folder set up called Asset Browser, and this is where I'll keep all the subfolders that I would add to this asset browser library. So I'm going to choose materials and add that in. So add to asset library. I'll do one more. So I'll back out of there and I'll choose objects, add to asset library. And now if I close this down, what we have is an option where if we go to a new window, and don't worry, I'll show you how to do all this a little bit later on. We'll choose our asset browser. We'll go from all to user library and we'll choose materials. And now I have a whole number of materials that I can just drag and drop onto an object. So let's see, in this case, we'll use a simple car paint material. It will just compile. It will take a second to do that. And now we have that in our scene. Okay, so it's challenge time again. Your challenge in this video is to customize the navigation options to suit your own preferences. So this could be looking at zoom to mouse position, orbit around selection, or it could be setting up the number pad or 3-button mouse emulation. Make sure to select the correct rendering device for your system. So this just means choosing between CUDA, optics, or the options for AMD GPUs or Intel GPUs. Make sure autosave is enabled. This is really crucial because you don't want to be losing any of your hard work. Now, once you've done that, join me in the next video and we'll move on to looking at Blender's UI. I'll see you then.